This latest chapter of My Hero Academia continues to align with our predictions for the preparation of this final battle, as Deku will be receiving a new hero costume. With the previous chapter, we received an explanation from All For One in regards to the danger of the traitor being discovered, which to him was no danger at all, as they meant nothing to him to begin with. That such friends were in reality nothing more than disposable tools intended to provide him momentary excitement and nothing more. As Yuga and his parents began to flee, we received his backstory. Both his parents were from wealthy families and had picture-perfect childhoods, which made their son's quirklessness all the more unsettling for them, as they didn't want him to be different from his peers, which is why when they heard a rumor about a man capable of giving others quirks, they jumped at the opportunity. However, the quirk Yuga had received was apparently incompatible with his body. However, that much was something they were able to reasonably mitigate by having a belt be specifically made just for him. However, All For One eventually spoke to Yuga telepathically, intent on cashing in on his favor, which resulted in Yuga's misdeeds as the UA traitor. However, when Yuga learned of Deku's former quirklessness, his despair was so great that he began to lose his composure and has now been found out. From there, Aoyama shot his naval laser at Deku, however it was thankfully redirected by Invisible Girl's refractory abilities, which subsequently provided us a glimpse of her face, which was followed by Deku apprehending the entire family with Black Whip. Now in custody before some staff members, the police, and all of Class A sat the Aoyama family. As it turns out, they possessed no valuable information on All For One, only that if they were to disobey him, they would be killed, as was evident from his demonstration dealing with someone who began to talk. Yuga believed himself to be rotten to his core, but Deku refused to believe such a thing considering all the good Yuga had done previously, as he would now offer Yuga his hand, claiming that the boy too could still be a hero. With this latest chapter, we open up to a shot of the two formerly quirkless boys, Deku and Yuga, who supposedly possess alternate fates, one given power by All Might and the other by All For One. Now once Deku said all this, Tsukauchi would tell him to hold on, as he would have Yuga's mouth covered, telling the young hero that considering Aoyama's hands were bound, it wasn't as if he could accept at the moment like we figured, and that regardless of the extenuating circumstances, Aoyama committed crimes by following the instructions of All For One, plain and simple. What's more is that although he for the moment seems to be harmless, there is still the possibility that he may be rigged to explode or something, like Lady Nagan was, and so a thorough investigation would need to be conducted at Central Hospital, making it unwise to allow him to speak anymore. And after all, it was upon taking Deku's hand that Lady Nagan was detonated, making this a pretty reasonable concern. However, despite the logical approach, it wasn't any easier for Tsukauchi to be the voice of reason here, as indicated by his facial expressions. He furthermore went on to inquire why exactly the family hadn't preemptively informed All For One about their raid on Kamino. Their response being that their communication to the villain was in fact one way, being unable to send messages unless they were demanded of them, what was certainly the safer play for All For One. But to interrupt Tsukauchi would again be Deku, who would pipe up about the unlikelihood of them discovering All For One's location, which would prompt the rest of the class, beginning with Kaminari, to catch up to Bakugo's prior realization about Deku's words, that this was their opportunity to influence the actions of the villains. And interestingly enough, the ones who collectively put this together would be the very same characters who had previously considered the bigger picture 2 chapters ago. And together they would all come to the conclusion that Aoyama may very well be the only one capable of deceiving All For One. A thought process Aoyama himself couldn't wrap his head around, considering the sort of faith his classmates were willing to place in him despite being unveiled to be the traitor only moments ago. And at that, President Mike, now holding a tablet, would begin to interject, questioning how the kids could be thinking like this, considering they themselves were the greatest victims of Aoyama's crimes. As just then, their class president, Ida, would say that they need to let bygones be bygones, that they needed to shoulder some of the responsibility for not realizing the weight crushing their classmate's heart when he needed them the most, which was why, as Aoyama was now crying at his lowest, they absolutely needed to extend a helping hand and support him as friends, and that for him to stand as equals with them again, he would need to be able to accept that hand. And good lord, these kids are lucky that Aoyama is not a true cold-blooded traitor, because otherwise they would be playing right into All For One's hands. And although I think a confliction of opinions on that would be very interesting, even still in terms of the narrative in regards to how things are progressing and where they seem to be headed, I can totally understand why that is not the case, because it would derail us a bit. It would be a bit too divisive when it comes to this class. They would not be a unit, they would not be one, they would not be unified, which is precisely what we need going into this final battle, so this is not the time to be divided. And this simultaneously also confirms why the traitor was brought up at a time like this, because they are needed to give the heroes a bit of an edge when dealing with these villains, who for the most part have the clear advantage here. Bakugo would consider what he had gone through on account of Aoyama's actions, and would joke about getting some hits in to compensate for the damages. And although it is not the same emotional response as the rest of his classmates, the sentiment is there. This is to say that if Bakugo of all people can accept him back, then they all could. My boy Kirishima would touch upon the impossibility of Aoyama's circumstance having now been eliminated by this shining opportunity to fight back and do the right thing. He would bring up the fact that they had all stopped Deku together, and that none of them would blame Aoyama for being quirkless too. That after seeing their response to the whole Deku thing, how could he ever believe that they would punish him for holding onto a secret and his own struggles? Now again, Tsukaoichi would reluctantly have to be the voice of reason here once more, as he would express that regardless of everything, they still needed to take the family into custody, as their story still needed to be investigated. As just then, we would have Aizawa chime in from the tablet President Mike was holding, as he would ask Deku if he had a plan in mind, which Deku did not. Aizawa was willing to take full responsibility for not noticing all this before. However, he would say to Aoyama that he has no intentions of expelling him from the school, and that as the homeroom teacher of Class 1A, he does have a plan in mind, which would prompt the ears of the Aoyama family to be covered. Now, we would not be provided any details of this plan, but the expressions of our various characters were pretty telling all the same. Apparently more evidence is required, but even Principal Nezu would recognize that it is an incredibly practical course of action. But from there, the Aoyama family would be taken away, and none of the students were to discuss the plan with anyone. Deku would call out to Aoyama one last time, as the boy would look back for a moment before turning his head once more. But back at the dorms, things were somber. They talk about gearing up, which Ida and Deku definitely needed to do, as their costumes in particular were in tatters. At which point, Invisible Girl would say aloud that they will definitely win, which would light the spirits of our various young heroes ablaze, as they would all agree. From there, Deku with a very serious expression would make his way elsewhere and onwards to the development studio for the sake of equipping himself for the battles ahead. As suddenly there would be an explosion, followed by the landing of Hatsune, and once again particularly her chest atop Deku. A major deja vu moment, as she would remark that it had been a while since she had last seen him, as all throughout, Deku's expression remained frozen in seriousness. Like we said with our prediction of this arc, if nothing else, this is the time for Hatsune to shine. This is presumably her last and greatest time to be of use, so it is great to see her here. The excitement to be had over Deku's costume upgrade is major when considering his various quirks, as even throughout the Rogue arc, he wasn't exactly even making use of equipment suited for his powerful additions, and with the cat out of the bag, he does not need to hold back with these specifications at all. I mean, after all, when it comes to the second user, whose quirk we still do not know, which is the only quirk of Deku's that we do not know, he did actually have a blaster or a gauntlet of some sort on his arm. What eventually came to be two, so maybe that will be in Deku's future as well, making this quite a potential upgrade indeed, and certainly for the Ida fans, there may be excitement in that as well. Now, to be fair, Hatsune's creations have been a bit spotty in the past, sure, but her gauntlets, which were custom made for Deku, along with the augments she made for his boots, worked like a charm. I mean, she is a prodigy of a support item inventor after all. And when it comes to Aizawa's plan, if nothing else, we can certainly expect it to be pretty cool, considering that is the sort of thing that he is known for. If this is the greatest capacity we can expect him to operate from going forwards, unless Eri fixes him up real quick, I wouldn't mind too much, because you have to love a big brain plan for sure. And you can make a big brain play by subscribing to Plot Armor with notifications on, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Sliceable Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.